Well, I just wanted to say that it's such a pleasure to be here, Jill. I've been following your work now for about 10 years. When I was just getting out of grad school, and I was taken with it then, and I'm more taken with it than ever now. This is your most recent show, Light Phrase, and it's mostly works all from the past year. Is that right?
Year or two, yeah.
Yeah, so all recent works, all acrylic on panel, fantastic new works dealing in the same vein that you've been exploring for 10 years. And it's exciting to talk about the works because, as I say, I think they're just getting clearer and stronger the more I see of them. And I really think they continue to be, may I put it, like deceptively inviting, where, you know, of course there's very lush color, there's inviting color, there's depth, and there's also incredible challenges in these paintings. And there's resolutions that need to be sought, and there's relationships that need to be figured out, so to speak, by the viewer, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience to tour this room. So it's exciting to talk about these today. I also, one of the things, I was really happy to write the essay for this show, and one of the ideas I got quite excited about when I was writing was this wonderful curve that we see in this painting, Spark Shift, behind us, which we were loosely calling a sine curve, you know, a mathematical function that, you know, can be plotted, can be seen, has connotations of infinity, particles, waves. There's so much going on in these paintings, and it's nice to talk about them with you today. Yeah. So before we begin, I mean, in a sense, to get into the paintings, it's always nice to have some basics. So I think it's interesting for people to know, where were you born? When did you start painting? What do you think of as your background as a painter?
Oh, born in New York. I lived in various parts of New York City, left New York at some point, but basically, I'm a New Yorker. My mother was a very serious and superb classical pianist, so I really grew up around a lot of classical music, sort of stewing in it. And I had, you know, always been drawing and making things, and I went to High School of Music and Art, and I had some outside training. So by the time I went to college at 17 at Bennington College, I was pretty well aware of past art and modernist art. I knew my way around the Museum of Modern Art pretty well, and knew what a lot of the excitement was about. Yeah.
That's how it began.
Yeah, that's before I came to college.
And what was New York like of your young painting days? Was it, would you say you were sort of on the scene in a sense? Were you meeting other artists at that time, or did that begin a bit later?
No, it was later. It was definitely, you know, coming to college was definitely when I really started as a painter.
Yeah, it was exciting for you.
It was incredibly exciting, and I came at an incredibly exciting time. I came to Bennington College in 1972, and it was, you know, just a few, you know, maybe 6 months after Clement Greenberg gave his famous Bennington seminars.
Yeah.
And at the time when I came there, it had really been, you know, very much a place for sort of Greenbergian, you know, color field painting. And by the time I came there, people were really turning away from that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It was really no longer the center of the central focus of the art department or the, you know, the students. It was kind of a reaction against it. When I came there, I actually fell in with those people who were still advocating and still practicing that kind of painting.
So were there factions? Was it a bit charged, the atmosphere?
It was a bit charged, yeah. I think it was probably more charged among the students than it was in the faculty. I think the faculty, they all got along, but there was...
but the students would stay up late and be talking about...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You know, what I imbibed there was actually a little different than what the public face of Greenbergian formalism or color field was, in fact. I think the people that I met had a very idiosyncratic, personal, or, you know, kind of deep understanding of what this color field painting was, that particularly the drawing teacher there is Sophia Healy, who's still alive and still up there making art. Also the critic Sidney Tillum was also very important to me. And they both had a very beyond the formal understanding of color field painting. That it was about a kind of light energy, which was also kind of related to life energy, which was also a kind of immediacy, color being prior to intellectual concepts. It was a very kind of direct, pure experience that was related to being psychologically open, open to life, open to the visual world. And also the way that color works in a painting is something different than the way ordinary composition of things or big areas of light and dark work. That it's almost like a, you know, like particle physics or something, that there's something more purely energetic about the way color can be in a painting. And I really took that in very early on.
Was it pretty much from the get-go? You were there at the age of 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
Was it pretty much from the get-go that this kind of thinking about color resonated with you and color became a central pursuit at a very young age?
Yes, yeah, it did. And the thing that's funny is that I don't know where or how I got off being very ambitious and full of myself when I came as a 17-year-old, but we all know 17-year-olds who are like that.
Yes.
And, you know, when I heard of all of this, I thought, well, you know, I'd see these color field paintings out in the world that were decorous and elegant and designer-y, and I thought, why are they like that? Color field painting doesn't have to be like that. I'll do color field paintings that will be more complex emotionally, that will have more drama, that will have more parts, that will be more like looking at old master paintings. This is what I'll do, and I would then go and paint these big paintings and bring them in, and the teachers would say, oh, that's a nice painting, but it doesn't have anything to do with color field painting.
Right.
So it just went on week after week, month after month, that I would be sure that I was going to do this important kind of color painting, only to be told it wasn't a color field painting, it wasn't a color painting at all.
Right.
And then one day I finally painted a very small yellow painting that didn't have any of my big ambitions in it. It had nothing of all of my dreams or hopes. It was just an ordinary yellow painting, and I was told that that was a color painting. So I learned a very hard lesson very early.
Right. But I'm actually there's almost a two-pronged lesson to what you're describing, because what you initially describe is your initial dreams there, and this idea of what painting could be makes me think of the paintings you're making now, which are not, I would say, purely color fields. So,
no, they're not.
You know, the ambition does
right.
creep in, but it's true, it takes time. It
That's
takes
right.
time. And to sort out the ambition from the desire, from the goals, from the abilities, it's such a tangle that I think young students are all involved in, and probably as painters our whole lives, really, you know, entangling our egos from the work itself. It's such a process.
It is,
really
and there's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm.
These paintings have in them, you know, each aspect of these paintings is something I kind of focused on at some point in my painting life over the last whatever many years since, you know, coming to Bennington in 72, graduating in 76. You know, that it was a time when I was totally focused on how you move across the picture, how you move in terms of the drawing. And then there was a time when I was totally focused on the color experience, integrating that with the materials, the material qualities of thick acrylic.
These are all themes relevant to your paintings now.
And they're all things that are in the paintings now, but each one was something that I worked on. But especially there was a time when I just worked on color relationships. I just did color studies for a few years, just to 4 color areas.
Oh, wow.
And felt out how I wanted the colors to work with each other and how I wanted them to come together and what I could and couldn't do to achieve that way of working. I did them on little canvas boards, and there were hundreds of them.
Literally 4 years of...
No, it was 4 areas, but I think it was about 2 years of
really
just doing that.
Focused on, and you did feel at that time fully engaged as a painter, and it was fully occupying to you.
It was a big transition for me at that time from what I had done, which was, you know, kind of, I was always excited about the materials and experimental with materials, and I would do all kinds of wonderful things with the materials, but I never felt that my color was really speaking.
Color takes a long time to learn, I think.
So long.
I think it's a rare aspect of your work, because I think there's a lot of great painting out there, and there's a lot of really great abstraction. But I maintain, I have yet to see it not hold true, that there are certain types of painting that can only be done, I think, after years and years of work. That's my own view of things. It doesn't mean that young painters don't do amazing work, but there are certain things that can only be done after years of being in the paint, I always think. And I think most painters, when they see these paintings, will also have a sense that this is someone who's really spent that time with the color, because color just doesn't behave the way it does in your paintings without a lot of experience and a lot of know-how. And I think that's a very interesting aspect of your work that people can keep in mind when they're seeing them. Just, the 2 years spent with 4 areas of color are here, they're in the paintings.
Yeah.
The other thing, I'll just quickly, before I wanted to get back to another idea, but a quick side note to that too, is the idea of the picture plane, and how beautifully you are able to hold things more or less on that surface. There's incredible recessive spaces or allusion to recessive spaces in these fields, for example, of, a sky blue or a watery blue. And yet the eye never goes deep. It never goes deep into that window. It's always held on the surface. And I say it because if anybody has ever tried doing abstract painting, they'll know that's incredibly difficult, that usually it tends to fall all over the place. So that's another aspect. What was the conversation around the picture plane when you were at school?
Oh my goodness. It was always a problem for me. It was early on always a problem that, that it's very natural and easy to go in. To make space is the most natural thing in the world once you start working on a rectangle. A lot of the emotion also that you feel looking at paintings has to do with entering space.
Yes.
So it's always been a struggle to find the space that is not that traditional space. And I think that this is something that's very important to contemporary abstraction, germane to the whole conversation going on in painting right now, that painting sort of ended up being a flat monochrome. That was the right way to paint. That was the advanced way to paint at a certain point. And I was very much in the world and grappling with that in my years as a painter out there. At this moment, for the last really 10 years at least, I think a lot of painters are trying to reintroduce all the things that the monochrome expelled without going back in time, without going back to a deeper space. And I'm just very excited to be not only finding a way to paint this kind of more on the surface space, but also to be in community with other artists who are making these kinds of discoveries or working with this kind of an issue. Because for so long, being a color-based painter, when color-based painting was not considered a good thing to do, or an avant-garde thing to do, or an interesting thing to do. It was just considered to be kind of a decorative thing to do, or whatever. I was always interested in what was going on around me in the art world, but I experienced an awful lot of isolation in my concerns with color. And to be able to now be in community with other artists and to be part of a dialogue is incredibly exciting.
Do you want to name any of those artists? Do you want to mention any of the people you're thinking of that seem? I mean, I thought it was fascinating what you said, that it's the space of the monochrome, but that people are now, the monochrome was a kind of ideal, and now people are saying that they want to introduce things that eliminated, but they're still maintaining a space that is not an illusionistic space. I'm literally just re-saying what you said because I thought it was so good that I'm just restating it.
I mean, gosh, I'm afraid I'll forget someone whose work I love,
you don't have to, but it's just one thing that seems relevant.
I mean, Harriet Corman, fascinated by her work. Thomas Niskowski, fascinated by his work.
Very fresh take on abstraction.
Oh God, I'm of course forgetting
didn't
forgetting people, but I'm interested in Susan Freekun's work. A lot of people.
Exactly. That it's not a pure, it's not a monochrome. It's not a pure. It's not just about the picture plane. Although
I think that my work is a little more field-based. It's more of, it works kind of more like a field into which there are different colors, but they're actually more interdependent and less bright and less different than they kind of appear to be.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if my paintings work differently, but they might.
I think they do. I think they do, but it's still, you've identified a very interesting space that I think is relevant to talk about. That's maybe, there's some aspects that are common to contemporary abstraction right now. To talk about these paintings, can you tell a bit about the origin of these paintings? I know them as, you beginning with these types of acrylic transparent pours roughly 10 years ago, and there's a beautiful article by Joan Waltemath that in writing the essay, I went back to where she talks about the origin of these works.
Yes.
And I just wondered if you'd be able to say a little bit about how these started to come to be.
Yeah. Elements of the painting have been in my work for a really long time. I just actually remembered when we were planning our conversation that my first exhibition in 1984, was largely works that were all transparent acrylic. And there wasn't pouring to this degree, but it was a lot of putting on a lot of fluid.
Yeah.
Definitely. It was a lot of fluid.
Yeah.
A lot of thick, transparent fluid. But the breakthrough to this work really occurred in around 2009, 2010. I was coming out of a time when I was doing 2 projects that were based on sacred text, on the Torah. I had gotten grant funding to do this idea, to realize an idea, which was to paint the days of creation, the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of rest.
Not a small subject.
By way of light,
Yeah.
right? I thought it starts with light. Somehow I'm going to make this be made out of light, and I'm going to do it abstractly, and it's never been done before. And the grandeur of this creation starts with chaos, and it starts with light and the beginning of materials. And I had this idea that this was all going to kind of come out of these color relationships.
Yeah.
And it was really a incredibly important, grand idea, but it was misconceived in certain ways. So it was an awful struggle. It was. I did show it, and I'm very grateful for that beautiful review that Joan Waltemath wrote. But what happened was I was working so hard on this project, and I was cutting and I was snipping. I was using theatrical gels, the plastic colored gels that you put
in front of theater lights.
Exactly, yeah. And I had a lot of them, and I had a million different colors, and I was cutting and snipping and trying to construct this thing. And things were just not going well.
They were collages.
They were collages. They were big constructed collages. And my studio floor, I usually have painted white because I paint on the floor, so I need it to be white. And so I'd be looking at the walls and working on this thing, but then I'd see on the floor, amid the chaos, these places where 2 pieces of plastic had fallen on top of one another that would completely knock my socks off. And I would pick them up and scotch tape them together and put them on the wall. And slowly but surely I had this collection of these little overlaps of 2 colors. And it wasn't every overlap, that's for sure. Hundreds or thousands of overlaps on my dirty floor. But once in a while, it would be something. And I have a history with Golden Artist Colors, makers of golden acrylics, working with their custom lab. And so I contacted the custom lab. I put some of the plastics in an envelope. I said, can you make something that looks like that?
Oh, very cool,
So I did that. And they sent me a bunch of samples, and I started experimenting. And man, was it exciting. It was so exciting. Oh my God. I started to make paintings that were really pretty much copies of these kind of chance encounters of colors. And so chance was very important in it. I found that I couldn't just sort of sit there and say, okay, I'm going to make this happen. It never happened that way. So when I first started making these paintings, they involved a lot of chance. And so the chance and the kind of chaos of Genesis and this, experimentation. It was really just a kind of a, it was a very potent kind of I don't want to say rebirth, but it was a something, you know, it was a restart of my whole practice as a painter. It really was. And for the first few years, they were quite small. And they've kind of gradually gotten bigger. And during that process of them getting larger, I met Christine, Barry, and Martha Campbell, and that's how I found my way here. But I had already learned so much about painting with color, and I had already learned that painting with color is a lot about knowing that everything counts, that the quantity of every color in relationship to every other color counts, how much the color has to expand. I learned that from color field painters.
The size and shape of a color.
The size and shape, but particularly how much. You know, it's not the same, a little bit of the blue and then how much of the blue. There's the, you know, there's the hue, there's the value, there's the saturation. And these paintings are a lot about saturation.
And going back to your very initial comments about being a student, you know, they have a different energetic life, really, if they're small or large, or when we were chatting in the studio, which kind of blew, I'd never heard anybody say this before, whether up against a curved edge or a straight edge. I thought was really interesting.
And the edges in these paintings are, you know, there's so much, there's been so much discovery about how, you know, how the edge affects the kind of vibration of the color. And I actually had an early conversation, I think it was in 1977, Kenneth Noland was in my studio. And he said to me, he wasn't painting the stripes at that time, he was painting the shape paintings, but he said to me, it's not really about the colors, it's about the vibration on the edges of the colors. And so I learned that early on, that color is vibration. And so, you know, you have a vibration in the materials, you have a vibration in whether it's matte or shiny, you have a vibration in the scale relationships, you have a vibration in, as I said, the edges. You know, pretty much everything is part of that.
Well, I was so taken with that story when I heard it about using the theater gels because, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but it is the most elegant sort of poetic way of tying in the idea of additive light mixing or color mixing. You know, as I didn't learn this till later in life, but you know, color has totally different lives and ways of being. And of course, the way we mix color, we teach little kids to mix, you know, they're blue and they're, you know, what do they mix? They're yellow to make green. That's totally different than the way people in theater mix color. It's in a sense straightforward, and in a sense it's completely poetic and mind-blowing that the additive process is, of course, you know, the color waves adding to each other to transform each other, to change the vibration, to change the wavelengths, and to change the color. Pigments, it's all about what's being absorbed and what's reflecting back. It's very basic to a lot of people, but I think when you think about that kind of dynamic color life of painting, I feel that's so central to your work, and I love that allusion in the theater gels to the additive process of color mixing. I also loved what you said about you know, it being that moment of observing that transparency. I think one of the first ways I really found myself entering your works was to simply observe areas where they are, you know, these overlaps, and this is a particularly powerful painting with this central gold shape overlapping this blue, and that color there, that what results, and of course also what results in the other overlap there, those are not nameable colors, not really. I mean, you can say, well, it's greenish because it's yellow on a blue, but I think this again speaks to the pure material skill as a painter. I would say these are literally two colors at the same time. There's such an awareness of them being two things at once. And that's, again, a powerful and poetic way to approach the works. If something literally is two things at once, it's beyond the nameable. So you're immediately, I think as a viewer, when one looks at these passages, transported into that more nameless aspect of painting. So I think it's you know, so much about, you know, as you learned as a student, you know, color as being, you know, prior to
very
language.
Strange. Very strange.
I would love to have, yeah, one day we'll talk more about those early people have a lot of, interesting associations.
It's a funny thing also with the overlaps, though. I think about it so much because this is part of this shape, but it's not, you know? And so these shapes, it's the color, you know, how you categorize the color or name or can't name it. But it's also, I've just always tickled how it's no longer part of the blue, but it is, you know?
Yes.
And so there's a lot of like logic stuff that ends up being so much fun.
Yes.
In these,
I mean, it recalls Venn diagrams, of course. There's that slight, you know, allusion to that. I don't think that's what the paintings are about, but there's that playfulness of, you know, is it part of group A? Is it part of group, you know, B? And if it's both, then it's actually group C. It's a different entity altogether. And those kinds of plays, I think, are very, you know, they're a part of the pleasure of looking at your works, you know, the richness of them. I think it's part of it. And in these paintings, what I was excited to write about too, and I think it relates to what you're saying, is that this amazing curve that we see, and you see it right from a distance. I mean, it's almost recalls Pollock. It recalls many earlier painters who are pressing right up against the edge of the painting to create this very expansive space. But it's not created from a line. It's not, you haven't ever made a brushstroke or drawn that line. It's all from this interplay that connects to make this larger whole, this larger compositional rhythm that I think is really
well, there are a couple of things that I'd like to say about that. First of all, I do these from color studies still. You know, I still stick to that kind of almost, you know, automatic, like it's not something that I do, it's something that kind of happens. It's kind of out there and I'm after it. So I still work with many color gels and sheets of color. And then I replicate that. But it's not all over like Pollock, and it's not a pattern, it's not pattern painting, but it does have the continuous going towards infinity, it could just keep going thing, which I've always wanted and felt that I could never have in my work because I was always so interested in relationships, like what is this doing to this? This has always been just really where my, you know, where the rubber meets the road for me. And, you know, changeability and real relationalism, but to finally be able to also expand. It's not a pattern, it's not just sine curves, there are straight lines and curved lines and almost curved, almost straight. But I'm so happy to have finally found a way to do that. It's really, you know, a big one for me.
It comes across powerfully. I was very excited about that aspect of these works when I saw them. Periodically through your art career, you've done teaching, but it was exciting to talk to you in a recent conversation where you sounded really excited about your current teaching that you're doing. And I just wondered what's making it exciting now, and what is it, if are there certain issues or certain ideas, certain things that you really feel that you can pass on to people at this point that's making it worthwhile? I think it's also worth mentioning that you know, your students were really excited to be seeing this show as well, which that was nice to see. As we discussed earlier, you know, the relationship between teacher and student can be very important. So, you know, are there ideas? Are there any things that you're thinking about now as a teacher as well as a painter?
Well, I think one thing is I really love one teaching of Hans Hofmann's that about color, that there's really nothing you can teach about color. I'm not sure if that's completely true, but everything to discover. And to try to set students on the course of discovery. There's so much there's so much that's out there that you can find. So I think that that's really important. And then another Hofmann teaching, very famous line that in nature, light creates color. In painting, color creates light. And it's, again, something very special about painting that I do try to teach my students, but it's something that I think it can take years and decades as a painter to really be able to understand. Yeah, a painting that makes light is a very, very rare thing, and they exist. They exist, absolutely.
So Jill, in previous conversations, I forget exactly the context, but the word formalism came up in relation to either your work or work at the time, and you said, no, that's not what I'm thinking of. You actually said, no, not formalism. And so as a very open-ended question, I was thinking of simply saying, why not formalism? What does the term mean to you, and what is it that it's leaving out for you? What is the not formalism aspect to you?
Oh, wow, it's a difficult question to approach. Talking about abstract painting is just so difficult. I don't think most people are aware of how difficult it is, and you write about abstract painting so well that I don't know, you must be aware of it. Anyone can paint an abstract painting, and basically anything you put on the wall, an empty canvas, is an abstract painting. So then how do you talk about abstract painting? And then all of a sudden, abstract paintings are selling for, tens of millions of dollars, and that makes it even more complicated. Formalism was the way that Clement Greenberg and people around him were described as being formalists. I don't recall if he or his colleagues ever used that term.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they did.
In your memory of...
In my memory,
yes,
I don't think so. But, I mean, the basic situation is any painting is, like, let's say it's a rectangle, let's say it's a surface, let's say that there's some paint on it. Mm-hmm. And let's say no matter what you do, that's going to end up being shapes and colors or whatever. Maybe, probably there's going to be some space. Those are formal elements. But they're also the elements of how we see the world. It also makes our whole relationship visually to the world. It's not just like about paint. And painting is a little contemplative area where you're meeting the world. So it's these formal elements, this paint, this all this stuff, and the formal elements that happen, and then it's you meeting it, it's the affect of the human being. So which do you talk about? I want a lot out of a painting. I've always wanted a lot out of a painting. I want a lot of affect. I want it to move me. I want it to get me. I just, I want it to feel like those paintings that I've loved in the past. But I have found that the people who know how to get from A to B, how to get the painting to be better, clearer, more something you want to look at, are the people who can be analytical about it. So I have had the incredible good fortune in my life to have had people in my studio who could be analytical and could help me see what was working in my paintings, better, worse, how to move the paintings along, especially the critic Karen Wilkin, who I've had a long studio relationship with. Her coming over and letting me know which ones looked better, which ones were working better, which ones were fulfilling my goals.
Right.
And that thing of critics learning from artists and artists learning from critics is something that was very alive at one point. I think there was more of a pushy or bullying aspect maybe at one point. Not there now.
No.
Constructive now.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Very constructive. That is a way in which I've always kind of been associated with the people who can talk about painting analytically. And the people who have been able to learn from artists and learn from studio practice. I feel that through that kind of analytical approach or presence, I've been able to understand that color requires an understanding of edges, or color and material, light and matter can coalesce, or that color energies as light get bogged down if you do X, Y, or Z. If your darks aren't working a certain way, or your value contrast isn't working a certain way. I've learned all those things, so you know what? Now the color is really working, and the paintings are really working, and now the experience of inwardness that I've always wanted is working. That's the goal. I don't care about form. Who cares about form? Who cares about that? But I do care about the paintings being able to speak. So I think that it was a false opposition, and let's move on.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of the way I've also heard you speak about materiality and immateriality. I mean, it's not the same topic, but it does remind me of that, that sort of structure that seems to come up in a lot of when you're talking about painting, as painting being a meeting
Yes.
point between differences. You know, you
Yes.
just talked about form versus an interior life, material versus the immaterial. And one thing I mentioned in the essay is that it seems to me is that it's very important that these be paintings, not projections, as wonderful as the idea of additive mixing and light color, actual light color is, or light boxes, for example, which would, you know, make your life really easy if you had light boxes, if you're working with gels anyways. You know, you can picture really interesting works using light boxes, but it's really important to you, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
that these be paintings.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
wondering if that ties in a little bit to the question of
Materiality.
materiality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel that painting is an extraordinary, is really extraordinary and precious, because you're using a material to get to an experience that's, to something that feels immaterial.
Yeah.
And it's not an illusion, it's really happening. You know, you're really making our eyes do something that is allowing us to see light differently. And so it's a reality, and it's a constructed reality, but it's a reality. And
It's really happening.
It's
that
really
seems
happening.
like a wonderful connection to why they need to be in paint. It's
and you
really
can come back
happening.
to it too.
Yes.
And you can come back to it.
Right.
But also, I just wanted to say on that topic that I have actually, in my time, done abstract paintings that had specific meanings. You know, there was the Genesis Project. There was another painting that came out of, that was trying to find a meeting place between painting and sacred text, Jewish sacred text. And there was a time when I actually did some political paintings. And that's a strong impulse. But it doesn't, to me, negate what painting does as painting. I think that the painting, it's not just painting, it's works of art as objects. You know, it's not just painting. I'm thinking of, you know, Buddhist sculpture. You know, I'm thinking of all kinds of works of art that were sacred, came out of sacred traditions, where this material thing is trying to speak about something that's beyond the material. And it is amazing, the relationship between what we can, you know, what we can see when we're contemplating in a kind of open way, and work that kind of asks you to contemplate in an open way.
Which brings me to, you know, in terms of what are these paintings about, which I think it's still a fair question to ask of abstract painting, that idea of what is the subject matter, what's going on. I think it's okay to ask that. I feel like it is, or at least as a point of departure, you know, whether it comes up with a different answer or not. And with your painting, something I've really found, I mean, again, they're about, you know, they have to do with sight, with movement, with sensation. And as I think I mentioned at the beginning, you know, they can be somewhat deceptive. You know, an initially inviting quality, and then there's an incredible amount of dynamism. There's a lot of tension in the works, and there's a lot for the eye to absorb, for the eye to take in. But then I think most interestingly, in relation to your work, is there's a final sense of resolution that I can't think of too many other painters that are doing that work in that way, where there's a feeling that the painting has a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion within the viewing experience. I mean, we certainly know that spending time with painting takes us interesting spaces, but it's quite a consistent feeling with yours, that it's a kind of a dynamism that gives way to resolution. And just a quick aside, it made me laugh. My sister, who is not an arts writer, but very interested, she said, you know, a lot of this arts writing, she said, you guys are always talking about tensions, tensions, tensions. And it's true. It's very rare that you read something, you know, dealing certainly with abstraction that doesn't say, and the tensions created by the such and such. And it can become a little meaningless. We talked about terms that become meaningless. And so I really think it's interesting in your work that those tensions give way to a sense of resolution. In the essay, I refer to light measure. It's a hard concept to write about, but that, you know, things that might be pushing or pulling on each other give way to a balance. I guess it's balance is a word that's important in that. So having said that, I think it also lends to the idea that, there's an optimism in these paintings in the sense that we, as humans, I think we like the idea of the possibility of resolution. We like the possibility of wholeness, of balance. Are these associations you would say are valid in relation to the work? Those kinds of, I'll just say more positive associations. Is that something you would seek out, or something that is
Yes,
relevant to you?
it's something that I seek out, but I want it to be a process. I do want it to be not just a given, that they feel calm or resolved. Yeah, one of those paintings, the painting over there, is called Light Wrestle.
Yes.
And I do want you to wrestle with them to some extent. And I think that the strangeness of the space that this way of working includes is part of that wrestling feeling. But there's a lot of things there are a lot of meanings for me, a lot of different kinds of resolution that I'm engaged with. I have, read and studied as a beginner, as a neophyte. I've read a lot about Jewish mysticism, which includes different God having different qualities that need to be brought into balance. And I love those texts, and I'm very consistently involved with and fascinated by and loving those texts, which are also about balancing yourself in life, which is harder. But that's what those texts are about. Discipline is about. And then I also, as I said at the beginning, I come out of a lot of romantic music, which has, the developments and the resolutions. And for a long time, I had not listened to that music. I just didn't want to listen to that music. And
it had complex associations.
Complex associations, and I wanted to get away from romanticism. I wanted to be a modernist. I wanted to be painting flat, material, real stuff, and not all this dreamy shmeemy, But, it's come back to me. I listen to a lot of people playing Beethoven now. I'm really fascinated with music. So that's another kind of resolution. And, psychological wholeness, the different parts of a person, how we come together and manage all the different parts of ourselves in terms of self, other, gender, balance, aggression, receptivity. How do you balance yourself? We're just all flooded with everything. How do we balance ourselves? So I really think it's something that painting can do for us. And when you see something like on a computer screen, it's all there already. When you see something, you walk into an installation, it's all there already. And the contemplation of a painting, it is something you do. It's very private, but it's also in a public space, and it is a balancing that you go through. So yes, thank you for seeing that and bringing that.
That's a really interesting way of looking at the work. That adds a lot, what you just said there. I just had a couple of last questions, depending on how you're feeling about some of these ideas. I'm not sure about this one so much, but it occurred to me. When we think about the artist and their role right now, I just tossed out a few ideas. Do you think about yourself as a communicator, as a problem solver, as a devotee, as a channeler? Do any of those terms resonate with you, or in terms of what a painter is supposed to be accomplishing right now? It touches on what you said in your last answer, I think.
I first have to say that just having survived to this day, to this wonderful show and this wonderful gallery, is something for which I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful to the people around me. I'm grateful to the gallery. I'm just so grateful. Because it hasn't been an easy thing. But I also feel that painting itself is surviving right now. And so I feel that the survival and the kind of the ongoingness of painting.
The ongoingness of painting.
Someone who was very kind to me was the sculptor, the great British sculptor, Anthony Caro. And he would always talk about the onward of art, that it just keeps going. And it has been going through human history without it being told what to do. It just goes, it comes out of us. And I do think that there's an onwardness of painting. And I hope that it will keep going without it being told what to do or what it is or what it isn't.
Yeah.
And so I want to be part of that. I want to be helping that. And I think also it's the tradition of painting, moving it forward, not just the Western tradition, but the tradition of making art that has, points to something bigger than us, that points to, to grandeur, that points to possibility, it points to a positive way of seeing the world anew in the present. I think painting's always done that. It's always been a new way of seeing, and the people who say that that's impossible, I'd like to, like to prove them wrong.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jill.